Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. Marcus with Shawn Hacket. This edition of Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by Axon Tire, helping dealers move more iron for the past 100 years. For more information, go to axontire.com. Axon Tire would like to give the loyal listeners of the Moving Iron Podcast a free resource mouse pad. You actually get two of those if you go to axontiretips.com, and there's a form at the bottom. Fill that out and send that in. They'll get that over to you. A lot of good information on that site as well. So check that out. Shawn's in Canada right now, so using that resource mouse pad going from metric to imperial conversion would make a big difference, right, Shawn? As you're driving down the street looking at tires.
I convert all the time. MMT to TTM to pounds to gallons to liters. I mean, I just do it all.
You're
the time.
all over the place.
Always converting, all over the place. So
bushels to
and I'm
metric
always looking.
tons. Look at that. Yeah, good times.
Celsius to Fahrenheit. You name it, I'm converting it. So
I like that. You might be able to use one of those mouse pads then. There you go. All right. Valley Transportation has been hauling ag and construction equipment across the country for the past 33 years. Call Parker at 800-657-4910 for all your trucking needs. At Valley Transportation, our goal is to help you reach yours. And no matter how you buy your ag equipment, whether it's from a dealer, an auction, or a private party, AgDirect can help you finance it. You can even apply online at agdirect.com. Learn more about your financing options at agdirect.com. Tractor Zoom has access to over $20 billion worth of heavy machinery sales data. Tractor Zoom's Iron Comps is the industry's trusted solutions for transparent, heavy equipment values and auctionable pricing data. Shawn Hacket is with Hacket Financial out of Boca Raton, Florida, and he is nice enough to come on and talk about what's happening in the marketplace. So, Shawn, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing very, very good from old Canada, Montreal.
Oh, Canada. There you go.
Yes.
He's up there enjoying some of that. So you're in Montreal, right?
I'm in Montreal. My mother was French Canadian, so I know Quebec quite well.
Okay.
And their 2-week summer is now. So it's beautiful. I mean, it's 50s during the night and 70s during the day, which for us Floridians is, on the cool side. As you can see, I got my nice,
I noticed that you got a park on and everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, I'm just, but for Montreal standards, this is as good as it gets.
Right on. There you go. Okay. Well, we had some fireworks over last week. We had the much awaited June crop progress report and also planted acreage report, and there was a WASDE report thrown in there too at the same time. So now you had all this stuff hit at the same time, and you had Farmers Business Network come out 2 or 3 days before that and say, hey, we think soybean acres are going to be way off. We feel like there's going to be less acres than what was predicted by the USDA. And they were right. There's about 2 million less acres, the soybeans that came out. And then roughly corn was roughly right around there, but it was, up just a tick more than what they thought. Huge volatility. I mean, with the run up from the day, they were up like 57 cents or something like that from rallied up off that report, finished about the same place they started. And then it just went sideways real fast and went and just took off down the next couple of days, big time, like down 60 cents and those kind of things. So, Shawn, as you take a look at that, that should have been a very bullish report, but we didn't see the bullish reaction from the marketplace. What's your thoughts there?
Well, you always have to be careful. Was the planting intentions report in March correct? It wasn't correct. I believe it wasn't correct, meaning that the numbers, although they look substantially lower, I think the market knew a long time ago that the acres weren't going to be that large for soybeans. I mean, the market has a way of, I don't think Cargill waits for the USDA to tell them how many acres of soybeans are going to get planted. I think they have a pretty good idea well before the USDA comes around to telling everybody. So, but nonetheless, the headline number was bullish, and we did have a 57-cent rise in the first 3 minutes of trade. And then we ended the day where we began. And of course, as you said, corn was about right where it was, and wheat was about where it was. And we didn't get anything unusual with the quarterly grain stocks. But more importantly, while all this was going on, we had this, we know that Turkey's been talking with Russia, who's been talking with Europe and trying to work out some kind of a framework for letting some Ukraine grain going, safe passage out. And on Thursday morning, the Russians claim that they retreated from Snake Island, which is a very strategic location and base where those that control it, can control a lot about what safe passage from Ukraine. And the apparent good gesture that Russia did there in retreating from there and Ukraine getting control of that, the market and the first supplies actually getting safe passage. Not a lot, but psychologically, we had our first shipment out of Ukraine through that passageway without any incident. I think the market is sensing that there's going to be some shift and some change in no supply to something. And we don't know how much that something is, but the idea that it looks like some of those supplies from Ukraine are going to get out, and that changes the psychology of the market dramatically. At a time, by the way, that we're worried about a slowing economy, that we're worried about the Fed raising rates too fast, that we're worried about them pulling liquidity too fast, that we're seeing the stock market crash. All these things are suggesting that maybe we're entering some kind of a deflationary period for asset markets as a whole, and so that fed into that, and then and of course Mother Nature, which is always at the end of the day, what we say is that we trade the reports, and then it all comes back to weather. Weather in Europe, weather in Russia, weather in the U.S. Yes, there's always a place you can look and say it's bad here, but overall the weather is not that adverse right now to overcome these other bearish macro forces, Casey. And so the speculator has decided he wants to get out. And once the speculator decides he wants to get out, it leads to margin calls, and then the margin clerks run the show. The margin clerk's job is to make sure that the accounts cover the margin. And if they don't have the money to cover the margin, then they force them to sell the position so they cover the margin. But the more they go down, the more the margin continues until eventually everybody has to sell and take care of the problem. And then that margin call selling reaches a crescendo. I think we're within a few days, of the margin clerks being done with impacting the marketplace. And then once the margin selling is over, we then can find out what's the real, where should the real market be right now? We won't really know until that forced selling from speculators covering margin calls is done. We really won't know where the true market is until that happens. And then we'll just have to wait and see, does Mother Nature continue to remain decent? Meaning, like, we're getting a lot of heat coming in, Casey, a lot of really high heat coming in, but it looks like we're going to get enough active moisture to kind of keep things from deteriorating. Now, of course, that can change where the models come out 3 to 4 times a day, and maybe tomorrow it says, oh, all that rain's disappeared and we're in a weather market. But for right now, at this moment, the market is saying there's enough moisture to keep things going. And in 3 weeks' time, corn will be predominantly pollinated. And the corn crop, for the most part, will have a pretty good idea that it won't be a disaster. Soybeans, of course, we still don't know until we get to late July and we look at the August forecast. So right now, I think that's where we're at. We're taking this Ukraine premium out. We're adding some macro bearish discounts in, and the market right now is unexcited about weather. So I think that's where we are, and that's why, at least in soybeans, what should have been a bullish reaction, could not hold.
Okay. So one more story I was reading this morning before we started rolling here, that there's a Russian-held part of southern Ukraine where basically the Russians were just taking the actual grain from that area and selling it across mostly to the Middle East right now. But I mean, I guess as you look at those kind of things, there's a lot of where they're at in that southern part of Ukraine, in that eastern part of Ukraine. So there's a lot of grain there, because that's where a lot of the grain goes to get transported out of the country. So there's a lot of grain sitting there right now. Assuming that Russia could do that, do you see that speculators could be looking at that also, saying like, well, they have a good chunk of Ukrainian hill grain already, and they're going to start transporting that stuff out? I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
It's always possible. It's hard for me to know what to believe or not believe from all the news out of there, because it's so iffy all the time. What I do, as I said to you many times, Casey, we try to predict what we can, and we try not to try to predict what we can. I don't know if I can't predict whether they have control, don't have control, have some control, but I do know that they're starting to harvest what I believe is to be a record crop of all time. And I do know from their export taxes that they inflicted last year that they had built up historically large wheat stocks in Russia that Russia does have control over. They don't need the Ukraine grain right now. They're going to have so much wheat to sell from last year's ending stocks rebuild to the record wheat crop that they're starting to harvest. They're going to be plenty busy selling Russian wheat right now than needing to worry about selling Ukraine wheat. So I think for now, that's the focus. At some point when they've cleared that supply out, do we find that they have extra supply that's Ukraine supply that they have somehow gotten control over? That may well be the case, but I think right now there's more than enough supply that Russia can sell. And I believe they will be willing sellers to countries like Russia and others that, want the wheat and don't really have a problem trading with Russia right now. So,
okay. All right. Speaking of weather, you look at what's happening down in Brazil, corn crop forecast in Brazil continues to see some pressure there. I guess as you're looking at what's going on in Brazil right now, what are your thoughts on Brazil in that key growing area?
I think the key factor here is that even though they had a drier finish to the corn crop, not as dry as last year, but it wasn't hot. We didn't have it was cooler than normal temperatures. And we've said so many times, one of the most important yield determining factors for corn is the temperature. Hot and dry is way different to crop yield potential than cool and dry. And they had a good start, meaning they started the growing season with good subsoil moisture, and they had some moisture at least for the first half. So when it's all said and done, the crop is off from what it was originally supposed to be, but it's dramatic. So even if it's off, from where it was, it's still a massive increase in supplies. And that means their exporter supplies are going to be huge going forward. And those supplies are now becoming available. Another reason that one could construe that the market might start getting more bearish to corn market, because so long as Brazil is a willing seller, and I've never found Brazil not to be a willing seller of excess supplies, their job is to sell. They like to sell. We're not going to have any corn shortage for the next couple of months that I could see. So the only thing that can overcome that is you have to have a real major crop problem in the U.S. And right now, with only 3 weeks to go for pollination, even though the heat's coming in, it looks like there'll be enough rainfall. So unless the models were to change that, it looks like we're going to get through it. And it may not be an all-time. I'm not saying it's going to be the record crop of all time or the record yields, but it's going to be a decent crop. And that's not going to excite the market when you're at $7 or $8. That's not going to excite the market when all those fresh supplies are going to start coming to the market in the fall. So I think right now we're just in a situation where the market it's not finding a new bullish story to trade, and when it can't find a new bullish story to trade, it starts to sell. And if it can latch onto some bearish news like Ukraine potentially opening up, bearish macro, then it really just piles on. I think we're in that typical period where unless Mother Nature kicks in, it's the rundown to the harvest lows. And then it's a question of, when do we make the harvest lows? Is it early? Is it middle? Or is it late harvest? We think it's going to be more of a late August, early September low, more of an early harvest low kind of a thing. That's our expectation. But right now it looks to me, unless we have a dramatic change in some of this moisture forecasting, that we can get some bounces along the way, of course, but it looks like we're just deciding how low do we have to go to get to harvest lows in August. That's what it looks to us.
Yep. Okay. So one more thing. So up here, the Canadian acreage report comes out here this morning. They're talking about all wheat planting, which could be down 300,000 acres from the spring wheat contentions, but up 1.3 million acres from last year. Obviously, record drought last year, and what that looks like. So canola is expected to have a total of $21.3 million acres, up 400,000 acres from April, but down 1.2 million acres from last year. So I guess as you're looking at that, how do you expect that to influence what we see happening in the wheat market?
So you gave us the expectations. Were those the expectations?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the report, I think the two most important markets to look at are canola and spring wheat. My feeling about what took place in Canada in terms of they had worse flooding, they had a longer cold spell. And talking to my customers there, who are big wheat farmers in Canada, I do know that many of them were really thinking about and expecting they would be switching a lot of those late spring wheat acres over to canola. So I would be looking to see if there's a surprise in lower spring wheat acres than expected and more canola acres than expected. I think that could be a driver of both markets if it's because, I mean, obviously we don't really grow canola in the US, so it's all a Canadian thing. And spring wheat, I mean, they're just as big at spring wheat as we are. So, they are a huge supplier of spring wheat. And if their acres really come up significantly below expectations, that could catch a bid in the spring wheat market, at least not the winter wheat, but the spring wheat market. So I'd be looking for, my suspicion is we might find less spring wheat acres than the expectations and more canola acres. That's my suspicion at this point. I think that's where the surprise could come in at. We'll just have to see what they say.
Right
So,
on. Okay. Well, Shawn, good stuff as usual. Folks want to reach out to you and get more information about what it is you're doing at Hacket Financial. What's the best way to do that?
our website is Hacket, Hackett advisors with an S at hacketadvisors.com.
It's all right. It's all right, Shawn. Don't worry about it. I do it 7 times a week and I still mess it up. Don't worry about it.
Hacketadvisors.com. We have all kinds of information on there with podcasts and white papers and sample reports that go over our weather algorithm, our capital flows, smart money algorithm, to let everyone know what we do, how we do it, to see if what we bring to the table could be of value for your listeners.
Right on, Shawn. Appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
Thanks, Casey. Always a pleasure and a blessing.
Right on, man. I am Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC, LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast, and go to the YouTube channel. Check out Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel, and you can see the video version of this. Shawn is going to be at the Moving Iron Summit coming up here in Nashville, Tennessee, September 6th, 7th, and 8th, giving his rundown of what he sees happening out there and his weather models and those kind of things. I guess Shawn's been moving to that time frame. That's a pretty good window to look through, especially as we head from La Nina or El Nino to La Nina or La Nina to El Nino, moving through this time frame here.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're already starting to see clear signs of La Nina. We're actually, if you look at the sea surface temperature of the storm, we're not in La Nina anymore. It's gone. Lots of things are starting to happen to show that we're getting the shift. The fact that the U.S. growing season is anything but what it was the last couple of years, meaning we're not seeing an expanding drought. We're not seeing, we're seeing a lot more moisture. Even though we're seeing some heat coming in, we're also seeing alternatively a lot of cool air coming in. Meaning it's a mixed bag. We're not seeing anything that we saw the last couple of years, either here or in Europe. And that means that this La Nina is not delivering on what most of the consensus had been saying all along, that this would be another La Nina year, expanding drought, all kinds of problems, a 2012 style drought. As you know, Casey, we were very, very strong that we felt those kinds of forecasts using traditional La Nina teleconnections would prove to be very, very wrong. And that's in fact what's happening. And that's a sign that by the time we get to your summit, that we're going to have even more clear signs about this big shift going on. And we're going to be able to really lay out, what does that mean for the growing season in South America? What does it mean for the growing season in the US coming up, the winter season, and how crops are going to be dramatically altered in terms of which crops have poor production versus which crops have good production. So a big, big shift going on. And it means a very different approach to your marketing, to your feed purchases, and such forth and so on. So I think once again, you've always timed these September summits right at an important juncture for weather. And I think this is really going to be a very exciting time to be talking about it, and also a very different presentation than we've been putting out for the last few years. And we will be talking about the Gleisberg cycle, which is going to be what we think is going to be the potential for a 2024-25 style 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year drought, and what you need to do to prepare for 2023 for that very important 90-year cycle. And so a lot of really, really good information that I think we're going to be able to put out there and get people plenty of time to prepare, just like we gave them plenty of time a couple of years ago to make decisions that could help them on the farm.
Okay, so if you're interested in seeing Shawn, you're a dealer, and you want to see Shawn give that presentation, go to movingironllc.com, click on the upper left hand or upper right hand corner, click on Moving Iron Summit tab, go down there. All the information's there. The sign up information is all there. So if you're interested in doing that, check that out, or send me an email at movingironpodcast@movingironpodcast.com, and I'll make sure to get that information loaded up and get you registered. So with that, oh wait, one more thing. My friend Alex is over in Ukraine. He sent me a picture the other day of some people he was hauling around to get from one place to another, and some other things. So he's over in Ukraine, doing some humanitarian work and those kind of things. So if you're interested in helping Alex, go to GoFundMe and help Alex transport humanitarian aid from Poland to Ukraine, or just check the show notes here, and there's a link that you can check there as well. So with that, I am Casey Seymour with Shawn Hacket. Let's move some iron, folks. Out.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving iron.